The laughter started before I even crossed the stage. I heard at the moment my name was called. Not applause, not quiet acknowledgement, just a sharp, cutting laugh from the fourth row of the bleachers that cut through the university gymnasium like a blade finding a gap in body armor. My mother's laugh. I would know it anywhere. I'd spent 29 years learning exactly which frequencies of that sound meant safety and which ones meant incoming. This was incoming. "Oh my God," she said, and she wasn't trying to be quiet. She had never tried to be quiet in her life. They actually let her walk. After everything. She said it to my brother Daniel, who was sitting next to her in a shirt that cost more than my first month's food budget at Camp Lejeune. I could see him from the staging area. I'd already spotted all three of them when I lined up, the way I always catalog a room the moment I enter it: exits first, threats second, friendlies third.
Mom.
Daniel's girlfriend Brianna, who laughed a half-second after my mother did, the way people laugh at jokes they don't quite understand but want to seem like they do. 47 people in that gymnasium heard her. I know because I counted. Old habit. The folding chairs were arranged in 7 rows of 12 on the gymnasium floor, with another 11 people standing along the back wall near the double doors, which were propped open because the air conditioning unit in the east wing of Millhaven Community College had been broken since March. The floor was painted crimson and gold. There was a banner above the stage that said "Congratulations, graduates" in block letters, one of the GS slightly crooked, like whoever hung it had run out of patience at the last minute. The dean, Dr. Patricia Ellsworth, 61 years old, 22 years in academic administration, a woman who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and had the posture of someone who had never once been dismissed in her life, was standing at the podium with a list of names. My name was on that list. It was also on a list Dr. Ellsworth didn't know she had yet. Didn't she drop out? My mother continued, louder now, performing for the people around her the way she always performed, always needing the audience, always needing to be the most interesting person in any room she entered. I told everyone she dropped out. I've been telling people that for 4 years. Another laugh, softer, conspiratorial, shared with Daniel, who smiled and looked at his phone. Guess she finally finished something. I took 4 counts of air in through my nose. Held it for 4 counts. Let it out for 4 counts. The gymnasium smelled like floor wax and old bleacher wood and someone's drugstore perfume. I could feel the fabric of the graduation gown against my wrists, the mortarboard slightly too large, sitting at an angle I'd adjusted twice already. My hands were completely still at my sides. I was thinking about what was going to happen in approximately 11 minutes. If you want to understand what 11 minutes can do to a family's entire mythology, stay with me. Before I tell you the rest, if you've ever been the one who held everything together while everyone pretended you didn't exist, hit subscribe. This channel is for you. I'll be here every week. My name is Rachel Marin Kowalski. I'm 31 years old. For the last 8 years, I have been a gunnery sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, assigned to a force reconnaissance unit whose specific operations I am not authorized to describe in detail, serving under a call sign Spectre that approximately 40 people in the world know belongs to me. I am also a licensed veterinary technician, which is the degree I was walking to receive that afternoon. The degree I'd completed online and in person between deployments, between surgeries, between 7-month stretches in places that don't appear on civilian maps. What my family believes I do, I work in some kind of animal clinic. Somewhere. I don't really talk about it, and they've never really asked. My mother once described my career to her book club as Rachel does something with pets. I think she cleans kennels. She said it without embarrassment. She said it the way you describe furniture. Something that exists and functions and requires no further thought. What I actually do or did in the portions I'm permitted to discuss. I locate things that are hidden, I neutralize things that would otherwise detonate, and I bring people home from places where the odds of coming home are not favorable. I have been doing this since I was 22 years old. I have the scars to prove it. The one along my left forearm, 6 inches, faint silver now, a lateral cut from a structural collapse in a training exercise gone wrong outside of Okinawa, that one my mother has seen, and called that thing from your bike accident. The one across my right shoulder, hidden beneath every shirt I own, that one she has never seen, and never asked about, and never will. There is a memory I return to sometimes when I need to understand exactly how this family worked or didn't work, and it begins in a gymnasium, not unlike the one at Millhaven Community College. I was 16. Regional Science Fair. I had spent 4 months building a water filtration model using materials I'd bought with babysitting money, a $63 investment, every receipt saved in a Ziploc bag because I already understood, at 16, that in our house, nothing you spent on yourself was ever considered justified unless you could prove it in writing. The model worked. It placed second in the regional competition, which meant it advanced to state, which meant that a project I had built alone in the garage between 9 p.m. and midnight on school nights was going to be displayed in the state capitol alongside projects from schools with actual funding and actual lab equipment. My mother forgot the ceremony. She did not forget Daniel's lacrosse game that same afternoon. She drove 40 minutes to watch him warm the bench for 38 minutes and then score one unassisted goal in the final 2 minutes of a game his team lost anyway. She came home talking about that goal like it was a moon landing. She had photographs. She had a short video she played for my father, who watched it with the television still on in the background, sound muted, subtitles running. I walked home from the science fair with my second-place ribbon and my filtration model in a cardboard box. It was October. The walk was 1.5 miles. I still have that ribbon. It's in a box in my storage unit in North Carolina, in between a deployment journal and a photograph of my unit taken outside Helmand Province in 2019. That ribbon is the only trophy I've ever kept. Not because it meant the most. Because it was the first thing I understood that I'd done entirely alone, and that being done entirely alone did not make it less real. Second memory. Thanksgiving, 2014. I was 19, just enlisted, home for the first time in 4 months. I had lost weight. Not dramatically, but noticeably. I was leaner, harder, carrying myself differently in a way I hadn't fully recognized until I walked through the door of my childhood home and saw my mother look at me the way you look at rearranged furniture. Briefly. Puzzled. Then past it. Daniel, 22 that year, had just been hired as a sales associate at a software company. Entry level. He wore a tie to Thanksgiving dinner because of it. My mother set his place at the head of the table. Our father's old spot, which had been sitting empty for 2 years since he left, and gave a small toast about what a man Daniel was becoming, about leadership and initiative and the future. I sat at the corner seat beside the kitchen door, the one closest to the oven heat, the one we'd always called Rachel's seat with the same tone you'd say the junk drawer. I had, for months prior, completed the most physically demanding training program available to enlisted women at that time. I sat at the corner seat and ate turkey and listened to the toast, and did not say a single word about what I had done, or where I had been, or what it had cost me to become the person sitting in that chair. Third memory, and this one is the one that clarified everything, that took every previous data point and assembled them into a conclusion I could no longer avoid. Christmas, 2018. I was 26. I had been deployed twice. I was home for 9 days between assignments. My mother threw a party. Not for Christmas, not for me, but for Daniel, who had just launched what she called his consulting firm. It was not, in any meaningful sense of the word, a consulting firm. It was a website and a LinkedIn profile and business cards that described him as a strategic defense and security consultant, which was a phrase he had clearly assembled from a Google search of impressive-sounding professional titles. I know this because I have a security clearance that required a full background investigation that took 11 months, and the phrase strategic defense and security consultant means something very specific in the world I actually inhabit, and Daniel had the professional depth in that area of approximately a decorative pond. But there was a party. 30 people in our mother's living room. A cake with his logo on it. A cake with fondant decorations shaped like a stylized globe, and my mother gave a speech about Daniel's vision and his sacrifice and his courage in striking out on his own. She used the word courage. I was standing in the hallway next to the Coates. I had not been introduced. One of her friends, a woman named Georgette who wore large earrings and asked a lot of well-meaning questions, found me near the drinks table and said, "Now which one are you again, honey?" I told her, "Rachel." "Oh," Georgette said, nodding, clearly searching her memory and finding very little filed under that name. "And what do you do?" I told her I worked with animals. She said, "Oh, how sweet, and moved on. I poured myself a glass of club soda and watched my brother accept congratulations for having a website. The mission I am permitted to describe in partial, unclassified terms occurred in the Nangarhar province in eastern Afghanistan in the early spring of 2021, during what was publicly characterized as a drawdown period, which anyone who was actually there can tell you was a more complicated thing than that phrase suggests. We were 3 kilometers outside a village whose name I will not write here, moving in a 4-person element through terrain that was predominantly rock and dried riverbed, an elevation that made every movement cost slightly more oxygen than your body wanted to spend. The intelligence we were working from indicated a network of devices, IEDs of a type that had been adapted specifically to defeat the detection equipment being used by the conventional units operating in the area, placed along a route that a civilian medical convoy was scheduled to use in approximately 14 hours. I am a trained explosive ordnance specialist. This is the piece of my career that my service record describes in clinical, bureaucratic language that does not fully capture what it means to lie flat on your stomach on cold rock in pre-dawn darkness and use your hands to locate something that was specifically designed to end you if you make a single misjudgment about its geometry or its trigger mechanism. We found 6 devices. I neutralized 4 of them personally. The 5th required a different approach, a controlled separation of a component that had been modified in a way I hadn't encountered before outside of a training scenario, and it took 41 minutes and a level of stillness I can only achieve by going somewhere inside myself that has no name but feels like the bottom of very deep water. The 6th device detonated. Not during neutralization, a secondary trigger activated by a remote observer we had not identified. I was 8 feet away. The blast pressure did what blast pressure does, and I went down, and Sergeant Marcus Webb, who was covering my left flank, came out of position to pull me behind a rock formation while Corporals Diaz and Ewan provided suppressing fire on the observer's position. I had a concussion, a separated left shoulder, lacerations to my right side from rock fragmentation, 4 of which required sutures in the field, and 2 of which left marks that are still visible if I wear anything sleeveless, which I don't, generally. The medical convoy completed its route the following morning.
Sabantant vehicles.
Medical personnel, equipment, all arrived safely. I was medevaced to Bagram. I had my phone. I had a signal, intermittently, the way you always do in those facilities, strong enough to receive, unreliable enough that you hold the phone at specific angles and don't move. The text from my mother came in at 3:47 in the morning, local time. I was lying in a cot in the medical tent with my shoulder immobilized and a bandage around my midsection, and the particular kind of exhausted that comes after adrenaline has finished its work and left you hollow. The text said, "Rachel, the car registration is due, and I don't have it this month. Can you do 400? I told Daniel, but he's got the business stuff right now." No question about where I was. No question about why it had been 11 days since I'd responded to anything. No question at all, just the number. Just the amount, delivered with the same casual confidence of someone who has never once been told no. I wired $400 from a military banking app using a phone I had to hold at a 30-degree angle to maintain signal, lying in a medical facility in a combat zone, with a concussion. I did not tell her where I was. I did not tell her what had happened 8 feet from my body 14 hours earlier. I typed, "Okay. Sent." She replied with a thumbs-up emoji. I put the phone down and looked at the ceiling of the medical tent and breathed.
4 counts in.
4 counts held. 4 counts out.
It was not the first time.
It was not close to the last. I have a spreadsheet. It is detailed in the way that only someone with military record-keeping instincts would make a financial spreadsheet, every entry dated, categorized, with a brief notation of my location at the time of transfer. The total, from the first wire I sent home in 2016 when my mother's heating system failed, and she called me at 2 a.m. from a house that was, she said, going to freeze her to death, to the final automatic transfer I was still running at the time of the graduation ceremony at Millhaven Community College, is $147,832.19. $147,832.19. This money came from base pay that was already modest, from hazard pay earned in locations that qualified for hazard pay, from deployment bonuses, from a disability determination I received after the Nangarhar incident that provided a monthly payment I had never once spent on myself, from tax-exempt combat zone income that I saved with the discipline of someone who understood, bone deep, that no one was coming to save me if I didn't save myself first. My mother's heating system. Fixed. Her car twice, the registration I mentioned, and before that a transmission failure that cost $2,200 and that she described to her friends as Rachel helped out a little. Her property taxes, 2 separate years. Once when I was at a forward operating base in Syria, and once when I was in a training evolution outside Okinawa. Daniel's first month of rent, when he moved to the city. Daniel's second month of rent when the consulting firm had a slow quarter, which meant all of its quarters, because the consulting firm existed primarily as a story my mother told. Daniel's car insurance for 14 consecutive months. A vacation my mother and Daniel took to Cancun, which my mother described as something I've been saving up for, which she had not been, which I know because I am the one who provided the $3,100 that made it possible, wired 2 days before their departure from a base in North Carolina where I was living on a food budget of approximately $180 a month because everything else was going home. I ate ramen. The instant kind, sometimes cold because I didn't always have access to hot water at the hour I was eating. I owned 2 pairs of civilian clothes, jeans and a gray sweater, jeans and a green one because I wore a uniform for the other approximately 330 days of any given year, and civilian clothes felt like a luxury category in a budget that had been bled to the studs. My mother wore and Klein at the graduation. I noticed it when I saw her in the bleachers. The blazer. She'd mentioned it 2 months ago. I found the most gorgeous blazer. It's a little much, but I deserve something nice sometimes. And I had processed that sentence the way I process most of what my mother says as data, as a note in the ledger, as confirmation that the word deserve in her vocabulary applied exclusively to herself. The blazer cost $218. I know because she sent me the link, unprompted, 3 days before I wired the money for her electric bill. The dinner where my mother made the declaration, the one that I think of as the final insult, though there were so many that calling any one of them final is generous, was held 6 weeks before the graduation ceremony, at a restaurant called Carmine's, which had white tablecloths and bread service and a wine list that came in a leather folder, which is the kind of detail my mother notices and responds to physiologically, like a plant turning toward light. She had invited 8 people. Her friend Georgette, who still did not file much under my name. 2 couples from her neighborhood, who I had met perhaps twice each. A woman named Sandra whose daughter had recently gotten engaged, which I understood was the main reason for the gathering. It is useful to have a comparison point. And Daniel and Brianna and me. I was there because I was home for 3 weeks between assignments and my mother had called and said it would mean a lot to her if I came, and I had agreed because I am still, after everything, someone who tries. The wine was ordered. The bread came. And then Sandra asked, pleasantly, conversationally, the way people ask things at dinner tables when they're genuinely curious or filling air. So, what does everyone do? I don't think I know what Rachel does. My mother answered before I could. Rachel, she said, with a particular tonal quality I recognized, warmth at the surface, something much cooler underneath. Rachel has had kind of a wandering path. She's done some things with animals. Moves around a lot. It's been hard to track.
She smiled at me.
We're proud of her for figuring things out. Figuring things out. 30 years old. 8 years of service. 2 combat deployments. A security clearance that required a federal investigation. A body that had been rebuilt once and kept going. Figuring things out. Daniel, my mother continued, pivoting with the smoothness of someone changing the channel, is actually in the security sector. Strategic defense consulting. He works with some very important clients on some very sensitive things. I'm not even always sure what I'm allowed to know. She laughed, and the table laughed with her. That conspiratorial delight people feel when told there are secrets they're not privy to. Daniel straightened slightly. He was wearing a navy sport coat. He had the look of a man who had practiced this moment in a mirror. I can't go into detail, he said, and looked at his water glass with what I recognized as performed modesty, which is different from actual modesty in the way that a stage set is different from a building. It looks similar at a distance and collapses if you lean on it. Strategic defense consulting. His website listed no clients. His LinkedIn had no verifiable references. He had never held a security clearance. He had never been inside a facility that required one. He had never signed a non-disclosure agreement that pertained to anything classified. He had, as far as I could establish, assembled the scaffolding of my actual career and built a business card around it. I ate my pasta. I drank water. I watched my mother's face across the table, lit by candlelight, animated and generous and fully alive in the way she always was when the story being told was the story she preferred. I said nothing. I already knew what was coming. Dr. Patricia Ellsworth called my name at 2:17 in the afternoon. Rachel Marin Kowalski. I walked across the stage. The gymnasium floor was slippery where the wax had built up near the podium, and I navigated it the way I navigate everything, with measured, deliberate steps, weight distributed, posture controlled. My hands were at my sides. My face was the face I wear when I need to be unreadable, which some people interpret as coldness and which is, in fact, the opposite. It is the face that happens when I am feeling the most. I was feeling quite a lot. I took the diploma from Dr. Ellsworth. She shook my hand, and then she paused. It was a brief pause, a fraction of a second, the kind that most people in the room would not have registered at all. She looked at my face, then at the list in her other hand, and then she looked at me again. I watched the recognition move across her features the way weather moves across terrain, starting at the eyes, then the slight parting of the lips, then the very specific stillness that comes over a person when their brain is reconciling two pieces of information that do not, at first, seem to belong to the same context. Her heels came together. It was involuntary. I could tell from the way her posture reorganized itself, a straightening, a drawing in, that she had not decided to do it. Her body had simply done it. The way bodies do when they have been trained to respond to a specific kind of recognition, and the recognition arrives somewhere unexpected. She said, quietly, in a voice that was not quite a whisper, but was definitely not meant for the gymnasium at large, Gunnery Sergeant Kowalski. Not a question. I said, ma'am. She looked at me for one more second. Then she turned to the audience, and the way she turned, deliberately, the way you turn when you have decided that what you are about to do is correct and necessary, and you have resolved any internal debate on the subject, that turn was the thing I had not entirely predicted, even though some part of me, the part that had understood the situation the moment I saw her freeze, had understood that something like this was coming. Excuse me, Dr. Ellsworth said, into the microphone, which she had not let go of. Her voice was clear and measured, and carried the particular authority of someone who is accustomed to commanding rooms. I want to pause for just a moment. In 16 years of administering graduation ceremonies at this institution, I have occasionally had the privilege of recognizing someone in our graduating class whose service to this country has gone unacknowledged in this room.
She looked at me.
I looked back at her. This young woman, this graduate, holds the rank of Gunnery Sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. She has served 2 combat deployments. She is the recipient of the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal. A pause. And a few other distinctions I've been asked not to read aloud. The gymnasium went quiet. Not the quiet of boredom. The quiet of recalibration. Could someone lead a proper round of applause? The room erupted. Standing along the back wall, 11 people were on their feet. The 47 seated people were on their feet. The sound was different from the polite applause that had accompanied every other name on the list. It was the particular kind of applause that happens when an audience feels it has been let in on something important, when the size of a room and the size of a story have suddenly, briefly, matched each other. I stood at the podium and did not move.
For counts in.
For counts held. For counts out. I found my mother's face in the 4th row. She had started to speak. I could see her mouth moving, some version of the reaction she would have had if this had been a story about someone else's daughter, some reflexive addition of herself to the narrative, and then she stopped. Because Dr. Ellsworth had stepped away from the podium and walked to the edge of the stage, and she was looking directly at the 4th row, at the woman in the Klein blazer, with the politely inquiring expression of someone who has noticed that a person in the audience appears to know the person on the stage, and she leaned toward the front row's edge and said, clearly enough that the microphone caught it, the words that would become the only version of this story my mother has ever been able to tell. Ma'am, I'm sorry, do you know her? My mother said, that's my daughter. Dr. Ellsworth looked at her for a long moment. Then you must be very proud, she said. And the way she said it, not warmly, not reprovingly, just as a clean declarative statement of what the correct response to this situation was, landed in the gymnasium the way a flag is planted. Firmly, without requiring further discussion. My mother said nothing. Daniel said nothing. I looked at my mother's face, and I saw the specific expression that I had waited 29 years to see. Not shame, exactly, and not fear, though there was some of both in it. It was the expression that happens when the story you've been telling about someone turns out to be not only wrong but inverted, when the version of events you've constructed and maintained and performed for years collapses in 11 minutes in a community college gymnasium in front of 47 people and a dean who stood at parade rest. I stepped back. I walked off the stage. I did not look at her again. "Thank you," I said to Dr. Ellsworth. Quietly. Just those 2 words. She nodded, and I saw something in her face that I recognized, the particular respect that passes between people who understand what it costs to do something difficult without asking for recognition. That was all. That evening I sat in my car in the parking lot of my motel, not a hotel, a motel, the kind with an exterior corridor and a vending machine that accepts cards, for approximately 40 minutes. It was 7 p.m. The light was going flat and orange over the tree line. I had my laptop open on the passenger seat and my banking app open on the screen. I'm going to tell you what the next 40 minutes looked like, and I want you to understand that there was no anger in them. Anger is loud, and what I was doing was very quiet. Anger is imprecise, and what I was doing required the kind of precision that I have spent 8 years practicing. I canceled the automatic transfer to my mother's household expenses account. $1,200 per month. I had set it up in 2017, and it had run without interruption for 7 years. I canceled the automatic transfer to my mother's car insurance payment. $186.00 per month. I canceled the automatic transfer to the account I had set up to cover Daniel's rent contribution. He paid the difference between what his consulting income covered and what his landlord required, and that difference had been $400 per month for the past 14 months. I canceled the automatic transfer to the subscription services linked to my mother's credit card that I had been paying without ever quite being asked to: streaming services, a meal kit subscription, a storage unit she rented for items I did not know the contents of, $94.17 per month. I canceled 4 additional transfers that I will not itemize here, because the specificity would embarrass people who have not yet been embarrassed enough, and I prefer to do this cleanly. Total monthly outflow terminated. $2,847.19. I am not a person who experiences satisfaction as triumph. But I will tell you that the silence in that motel parking lot, after I closed the banking app, was the particular kind of silence that happens when something has been recalibrated. A supply line, severed. A logistics chain, terminated. In military language there is a phrase, weapons free, which means you are clear to engage at your own discretion, that the parameters of the situation have been assessed and the decision has been made. I was not engaging. I was withdrawing. I was calling back every resource I had deployed into a theater that had never, not once in 8 years, sent anything back. I opened my email. I attached one document, my unclassified service record, 7 pages, dates and deployments and commendations, and the particular language of a career that does not require elaboration, to an email addressed to my mother. The subject line was blank. The body of the email was blank. I sent it at 7:43 p.m. Then I closed the laptop and sat in the silence and let the orange light finish its work on the tree line and become dark. My mother's credit card, the one I had been covering the minimum payment on for the past 3 years, a figure that had become embedded in my financial life the way a shrapnel fragment becomes embedded in tissue, inert but permanent, was declined 11 days later at a restaurant called Sienna's, which had white tablecloths and a leather wine list, because of course it was that kind of restaurant. Because my mother has always understood her own worth in terms of what settings will confirm it. She called me from the parking lot. I know it was the parking lot because I could hear car sounds and the specific acoustics of outdoor air, and because she would not have made this call from inside the restaurant. The call came in at 8:54 p.m. I let it ring. She called again. I answered the second call. She said, "Rachel, something is wrong with the account. I think there's a bank error." I said, "There's no error." There was a silence. "The transfer stopped," I said. "All of them." As of 11 days ago. Another silence. Longer this time. Rachel, I don't understand what you're. You have the email, I said. Read it. I ended the call. Daniel's situation resolved itself with less drama and more consequence, which is often how it goes. Drama is loud, consequence is structural. A client he had been pursuing, a mid-sized private security firm in the city, had apparently done the kind of research that clients do before signing consulting agreements and had found that his background did not support the credentials he had implied. He called me 8 days after my mother's restaurant call, in the middle of the afternoon, and I let it go to voicemail, and the voicemail was 3 minutes and 40 seconds of the sound of a person who had built a house on somebody else's foundation discovering that the foundation had been withdrawn. His lease was up in 60 days. The landlord, whom he had assured, apparently, that the consulting work was about to reach a new tier, declined to renew. The business cards with the Globe logo are still in his apartment somewhere, I assume. There is a morning I return to sometimes when I want to understand what it feels like to be on the correct side of a decision I took a very long time to make. It is 6 weeks after the graduation. I am in North Carolina. I am sitting on the steps outside my apartment, a one-bedroom apartment that I pay for alone, without remainder, without apology, and I am drinking coffee from a mug that I bought at a craft fair 3 blocks from my building, 14, white with a small blue fish on the side, which I chose because I liked it, which is the only criterion I had to satisfy. The morning is cool. Early September light, the kind that is still deciding whether it will be summer or something else. There are birds. I don't know the species. This is a gap in my knowledge base I have decided, at 31, to remedy, and I have a small field guide on my kitchen counter that I have used 6 times in the past 2 weeks. I am not happy in a loud way. I do not feel triumphant. Triumph is for people who are in a competition, and I was never in a competition. I was in a situation I did not choose, and now I am out of it, and the distinction matters. My phone rings at 8 a.m. My mother's number. I look at it for 3 rings, and then I decline it and put the phone face down on the step beside me. I have spoken to her once since the parking lot call, briefly, at the prompting of a cousin who thought mediation was possible and who does not fully understand either of us. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. My mother said things I will not repeat here because they belong to a register of language that requires a kind of desperation I do not wish to document.
She cried.
Not the gentle kind, the kind that is loud and structured and has always in my history with her been a tactic before it was an emotion. I said very little. I am not in the business of cruelty, and I am not in the business of comfort. I am in the business of clarity. She is not broken in the way stories like this often end with people broken, dramatically, obviously, in a way that reads as justice. She is emptier, like a room that has had its furniture removed. The architecture is still there. The lights still work. But there is an echo where there used not to be one, and the echo is made of all the money that is no longer arriving, all the story that has been corrected, all the people at Carmine's and at the graduation and in her book club and at Georgette's house who now have a different set of facts available to them than the ones my mother had been providing. She lives with that echo. I cannot fix it, and I would not if I could. I pick up the field guide. There is a bird in the tree at the edge of my parking lot, brownish, compact, with a slight reddish tinge at the breast, that I've been trying to identify for 4 days. I turn to the thrushes section. The light is good. I have nowhere to be until noon. There is a thing we say, in the particular culture I have lived in for 8 years, that I did not fully understand until recently, until the morning after I sent that email and sat in a motel parking lot and watched the orange light go dark. The mission is the mission. It means the objective is the objective. It means you do not confuse the doing with the feeling. It means you identify what needs to happen, you make it happen, and then you go home. I am home. The bird in the tree is a hermit thrush. I find it on page 147, and something in my chest releases an inch, the way it does when a thing you've been trying to identify finally becomes known. I close the field guide and drink my coffee. This is what peace looks like, for me. Not loud, not triumphant, just mine.